We're here with composer and musician Craig Safan talking about his memories and personal relationship with legendary composer Elmer Bernstein. Craig, first of all, thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure to be here, Berto.
As a first question, I'm going to name a book, and please tell us the first thing that comes to your mind. The title is The Joy of Music.
Well, The Joy of Music brings back many memories to me. It was written, of course, by Leonard Bernstein, no relation to Elmer, but it was the first book about music that I ever owned. It was a gift. I think I was 11 years old, and I ate it up. I just loved the book. And especially, I loved the part about Stravinsky and the Rite of Spring, and that I went right out and bought that album, and it was the first classical record album I ever owned was the Rite of Spring.
Uh-huh. How did you meet Elmer Bernstein? Do you recall your first encounter with him?
Well, I met Elmer through his son Peter. I was a songwriter, and I was playing with my brother Mark. We were called the Safan brothers, and writing songs. And we were part of a group of musicians who all revolved around this one producer studio owner named Charles Plotkin. And one of the people who was there was Peter Bernstein. He played with a band. The band, I believe, was called the Cretones. And Andrew Gold played guitar, and who was Ernest Gold's son. And it was a group of people who were the sons and daughters of well-known Hollywood composers. I had no idea about this at the time, but when I started to drift into film music, I suddenly realized that all my friends' parents were doing film music. So I called Elmer, and he basically said, "Come over, say hi," and invited me to his recording sessions. And so I can't remember the exact first time I met him, but what I remember the most is watching him score The Shootist, which was I think John Wayne's. It could have been one of his last movies, but it's with John Wayne and Ron Howard, and he invited me to come to the scoring session at Warner Brothers to watch him record and conduct that score.
How was Elmer as a person? Pretty much everybody describes him as a very kind, close, and charming person. Is that right?
Well, yes, but I think what impressed me that is true, and he was very charming, extremely charming. But I think what impressed me the most about Elmer was his excitement and energy. He just emanated this feeling of excitement about life, about music, about the world, and I thought, wow, that is such a wonderful attribute to have. Especially looking at someone who was quite older than me, because I was probably 24 or something like that, or maybe 25 at the time. And looking at what I considered an older person, he just hadn't. There was no bitterness, there was no depression, there was no ennui. There was no tiredness. He was just so there and so present. And I thought, I hope I can be like that when I'm that age.
Well, there is no doubt that Elmer Bernstein influenced a lot of composers through the years. But how did he influence your career in particular?
Well, he was very key in my career. Not only did he take me under his wing a bit, I had several other mentors too at the time, Ernest Gold and Fred Steiner. But I think what Elmer did that was most key to my career, other than just through example showing me how to live and also how to score film music, which is another thing we could talk about. But what he did was he was at one point we had the same agent, and I was still in my 20s, and he had been offered a low-budget film called Tag, the Assassination Game, and he didn't really want to do it, but the producer's father was a friend of his from National Geographic. And Elmer and my agent, Al Bart, sort of said, hey, why don't we get Craig this job? And they did their magic, and Elmer recommended me, and I got that job. And that's how the director was Nick Castle, who went on to be one of the directors that I worked the most with in The Last Starfighter, Major Payne, Mr. Wrong. I did many movies with Nick.
Uh-huh. Well, recently we had the opportunity to interview Peter Bernstein, and previously, before you mentioned that you work in the same musical studio.
Yes.
What do you recall of those days? Do you miss something of those days?
Well, the only thing I miss is my energy, because when you're like 23, it's like you're stupid and you have a lot of energy, which is a very powerful combination. Now I'm smarter, but I have a lot less energy, and I'm at the other side of that. But what I remember is that we just had a great time. We were having fun. We were all playing music. Linda Ronstadt was around because Kenny Edwards and some of the players were friends with Linda, and also Jennifer Warnes, who did the song "Up Where You Belong." She was around and dating my brother, and it was just a lot of fun. We all played. I did a little arranging. I did a little film arranging, and it was just a very exciting time. And we all cross-pollinated our musical styles, and of course Andrew Gold was part of that, and he was such a phenomenal musical talent.
Uh-huh.
He was a great guitar player, piano player, bass player, songwriter, singer. He just he did everything, and that was Ernest Gold's son. You know Ernest Gold?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that was Ernest.
Okay, going back to Elmer Bernstein, he was an incredible teacher for many musicians. Do you remember any good advice from him, or even any anecdote?
Well, he didn't really give me any anecdotes, but I have an anecdote that watching him record The Shootist, there was a scene that he was trying to clarify action on the screen. He was trying to clarify where different people were physically on the screen through the music. And I thought I knew exactly what he was trying to do. I could watch it. And then the producer came up, and the producer basically said it wasn't working. He didn't understand it. And Elmer just dealt with it very politely, but you could see that the producer did not get what Elmer was trying to do there. Uh-huh. And my thought and my lesson was, wow, if a producer can do this to the great Elmer Bernstein and just like rake him over the coals, give him trouble, not get what he's doing, and not trust in him, I thought, boy, that's a Hollywood lesson right there. That's a big lesson. Uh-huh. In other words, they can call you the maestro, which they don't in Hollywood, by the way, but you're just at the mercy of the director, of the producer, and even if you're one of the great composers, which at that point he certainly was, you're still not free from the misunderstanding and abuse and having to deal with people who don't get it.
Uh-huh. He was a very remarkable composer, and the word remarkable only starts to describe him. But what do you like the most about his music and scores?
Okay, what I like the most, and this is another lesson I learned as a young composer, sometimes his music you could go, oh, that sounds like Aaron Copland, or that sounds like this. But what I learned watching him score movies was that film music isn't generally about music that you play in the concert hall. Mm-hmm. It's about music that helps develop the story, expresses the subtext, reaches the audience in a way that the audience cannot fight. In other words, it goes directly into the body of the audience without the audience saying, okay, you can come in. It just does it. And so the music functions in a movie totally different than in a concert hall. It's telling the story. That example I gave of a very complicated scene in The Shootist where there was person behind the bar. John Wayne was on the floor. A guy was coming in another door. There was another robber hiding behind a curtain. And Ronnie Howard, who was young then, was behind another door. And the music helped define the danger of each person. And that's what I learned from Elmer the most about scoring, is what music does in a film. And that's what makes you a great composer. I mean, it's great if you write a great melody and you get a great orchestra sound and all that's fine. But if you don't do the basic job of telling the audience what isn't obviously in the picture, telling them what the feelings are of the characters, what the danger is, what the emotion is, and what the action is, that's what a good composer does, and that's what Elmer always did in his movies.
What's your favorite score from him?
I know there's a lot of them, and I know it's corny, but I mean, I think to me, I mean, still Kill a Mockingbird, just every time I see that movie knocks me out. But frankly, I love The Age of Innocence. I mean, I think that's a gorgeous score. And
it is.
And it expresses the talk about expressing the subtext and the longing, the sadness, and the time gone by, and our feelings about that. That music expresses that in that melody so perfectly. I mean, To Kill a Mockingbird, obviously, is just one of the great scores ever written. But I think those two are my favorite. I mean, I certainly love a lot of other ones too, but and his more energetic scores I love. But those are the two because they hit me emotionally I mean, I'm totally defenseless against both those scores. They just come on and they just evoke a feeling of a lost time, of childhood, of all that longing and of the sort of beauty of the world. And they're amazing. I think they're both great scores.
What's your take about the?
What's your favorite?
I would say the Ten Commandments. I think it was my one of the first scores I ever heard when I was a kid, and that it was so magnificent. So I mean, it just even these days is. But other great score is the Birdman of Alcatraz. That's another which is very, very delicate and it also absolutely incredible movie, but also it has several elements that shares something with To Kill a Mockingbird as well. It's very delicate, and that's the Elmer Bernstein is amazing. I mean, it's it can make you cry if he wants. You can cry with that music. It's amazing. It's absolutely.
I agree.
And talking about the current music scene, what's your take about the current scores? Do you miss the creativity of the magical composers like Elmer Bernstein or Ernest Gold?
Well, I don't. It's a little hard to comment because I'm at that point in my career where I'm not getting hired that much. So it's a little hard for me to be objective. But I don't hear the kind of great scores that I think I grew up with, but I think maybe that's everyone's complaint and of their, when they grow up. Mm-hmm. And maybe the kids today will look back and think that a lot of the scores today were great. But I hear scores that have been so worked over by the producers and the directors that are so beholden to the temp tracks because obviously, back in the day when Elmer was scoring, there were very few temp tracks. The temp tracks were extremely difficult to do, and they would only do them over a big montage scene or something like that. Even back in the 80s when I was doing a lot of my movies, there were very few temp tracks. So I can go into a movie now, and you can almost always tell what the temp track was. And I think composers are... In a way, I don't think composers are less talented because I think there's always talented people, but I think they're more constrained by the fact that the editor and the producer and the director can work on the music so much more. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of I did a long time ago. I did one piece of music for a movie called Thief for Michael Mann, and it was a very simple piece of music, and I recorded it on 24-track tape. And when Michael got it, he used it in the film, but what he did is he sort of cut it up and he reorganized it and he moved the guitar to a different place. And so now that impulse of a director to want to control the music is to the point where they can do it perfectly and seamlessly. And they almost don't need a composer in a way. If they could just own all the music in the world, they almost don't even need a composer. So I think that's the problem with film composing now, when compared to the age of when Bernstein did his music, or Ernest Gold.
Well, that's all. We don't have more time, Craig. We'd like to thank you very, very much for your time and kindness. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Thank you very much, and bye-bye.
Bye, Berto.